Thomas Murphy, Caesar Smith, had evidently kept their slave names as they had made the passage to liberty, but British freedom must have been born or bought as someone else. He may have shaken off that name, like his leg irons, on one of the 81 sailings out of New York in 1783, which had taken 30,000 loyalists, black and white, to Nova Scotia, for no one called British freedom is listed in the Book of Negroes, which recorded those who, as free men and women, were at liberty to go where they wished. There were certainly others who changed their names to reflect their new status. James Legree, for instance, the former property of Thomas Legree of Charleston, became, in Nova Scotia, Liberty Legree. It is also possible that British freedom could have found his way to Nova Scotia in one of the earlier Loyalist evacuations, from Boston in 1776 or from Charleston in 1782. In the frightening months between the end of the war and the departure of the British fleets, as American planters were attempting to locate the whereabouts of escaped slaves, many of them changed their names to avoid identification. British freedom may just have gone one step further in giving himself an alias that was also a patriotic boast. Whichever route he had taken, and whatever the trials he was presently enduring, British freedom's choice of name proclaimed something startling, a belief that it was the British monarchy, rather than the new American Republic, that was more likely to deliver Africans from slavery. Although Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence had blamed the Christian King, George III, for the institution of slavery in America, blacks, like British freedom, did not see the king that way at all. On the contrary, he was their enemy's enemy, and thus their friend, emancipator and guardian. Looking to the King of England as a benefactor had a long tradition. When plans for a slave uprising in Raritan Country, New Jersey, were discovered in 1730, one of the black informers told a Dr. Reynolds that the cause was the pack of villains who had defied a positive order from King George sent to the governor of New York to set them free. A generation later, blacks, conspicuously excluded from the blessings of American liberty, derided what they call free in this country, in the words of Towers Bell, a true Briton, as he signed himself. Bell wrote to the British military authorities at the end of the war that he had been taken from Britain against his will to Baltimore, and sold for 4 years as a slave, which I suffered with the greatest barbarity in this rebellious country. Now, with the hostilities over, he wanted nothing better than to return home to old England. Tens of thousands of African Americans clung to the sentimental notion of a British freedom, even when they knew that the English were far from being saints in respect to slavery. Until 1800, when its courts decisively ruled the institution illegal, there were slaves as well as free blacks in Nova Scotia, and there were hundreds of thousands more in the British Caribbean. Nonetheless, in 1829, one of the first militant African-American emancipationists, David Walker, wrote from Boston in his Appeal to the Colored Citizens of the World that the English were the best friends the colored people have upon earth, though they have oppressed us a little and have colonies now in the West Indies which oppress us sorely. Yet notwithstanding, they, the English, have done 100 times more for the amelioration of our condition than all the other nations of the earth put together. White Americans, on the other hand, with their posturing religiosity and their hollow cant of freedom, he consigned to the lowest reaches of hypocritical infamy. Parliamentary abolition of slavery in 1834 did nothing to change this generous assessment of British benevolence towards Africans, nor the Royal Navy's pursuit of slavers, some of them American, on the West African coast. In 1845 to 1847, touring Britain as he lectured on the iniquity of American slavery, the black orator Frederick Douglass echoed Walker's fulsome view of the English as the emancipators. In 1852, he would ask in an Independence Day oration, "What to the slave is the 4th of July?" and would answer that your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. You may rejoice, I must mourn. Whether the British deserved this reputation as the most racially broad-minded among nations and empires is, to say the least, debatable. During the American Civil War of 1861 to 1865, both policy and people leaned, if anything, towards the slave-owning Confederacy rather than the Union, not least because it would check the threatening expansiveness of the American Republic. But during the Revolutionary War, there is no question that tens of thousands of Africans enslaved in the American South did look to Britain as their deliverer, to the point where they were ready to risk life and limb to reach the lines of the Royal Army.